My name is Solene, 34 years old, currently living in Minnesota and teaching literature at a small university. The man who raised me and taught me right from wrong passed away 3 weeks ago. Just 4 days after the funeral, my half-brother Garrett threw a housewarming party at his new home. Right in the middle of the gathering, in front of all our relatives and friends, he raised his glass and declared, "Grandpa left me the cabin by Silver Pine Lake." The cabin I had helped repair, repaint, and fill with years of memories alongside Grandpa. And Garrett? He had visited exactly 3 times in the past 6 years. Have you ever experienced a moment when the world suddenly flipped upside down, and all you could do was stay silent just to keep from crying in front of everyone? If you've ever been through something like that, leave a comment below, hit like and subscribe to the channel so we can open the door to a truth they wanted buried forever. Because this story is only beginning. I remember the day my mother died of a stroke as clearly as if it happened yesterday. It was a cold and damp April afternoon. The rain wasn't heavy, but just enough to drape our small home in an unshakable gloom. I was 13, too young to fully grasp the weight of losing a mother, but just old enough to know life would never be the same again. It was my grandfather who picked me up from the hospital. I sat in the passenger seat of his old pickup, clutching the porcelain doll my mother left me, feeling hollow inside. He didn't say a word the entire drive, just turned on the heater and lowered the radio volume. When the truck turned onto the dirt road leading to the cabin by Silver Pine Lake, the place where our family used to gather during holidays, he finally spoke, his voice gravelly and slow. "From now on, this place is your home, Solene. And mine." Grandpa wasn't one to show emotion easily, but the way he folded my blankets every night, the way he made steaming bowls of chicken soup just like Mom used to, told me more than words ever could. That cabin, with its slanted wooden roof and foggy window panes, became the only safe haven I had. In the years that followed, every afternoon after school, I'd find him on the porch in his creaky wooden chair, gently rocking as he held his worn banjo, eyes fixed on the lake as it changed color with the setting sun. I'd sit beside him, listening to stories of his youth, of snowy winters blanketing the roof, of the time he caught the biggest fish in the lake, and the silly arguments he had with Grandma just because she insisted he eat more greens. He never raised his voice at me. Even when I made mistakes, he would just pause, then quietly say, "Everyone messes up. What matters is what you learn from it." Garrett was different. He was the stepson of Grandpa's second wife, who came into the picture after Grandma passed away. Garrett was 4 years older than me, lived in Chicago with his parents, and only showed up for big holidays, usually Christmas or Thanksgiving. Every time he visited, the cabin's calm was shattered. Garrett talked loud, laughed louder, and always came bearing expensive gifts for Grandpa, from Italian wine to vintage French watches. He called him Pops, hugged him like a movie star, and asked, "Pops, what's the doctor saying these days? I'm so worried." But after dinner, he'd sit glued to his tablet, groaning that he was bored to death, because the Wi-Fi was too weak. One time when I was 17, Grandpa and I were repainting the fence around the cabin. Garrett drove up, smiling, wearing a brand new leather jacket. He didn't greet us, just smirked and said, "Why haven't you sold this place yet? A lakefront lot like this could go for hundreds of thousands. I know a great real estate agent. Want me to call him?" I still remember Grandpa's look then. He wasn't angry, just deeply sad. When Garrett went inside to get water, Grandpa paused, wiped his forehead with an old rag and said softly, "This place isn't for sale. It's memories. It's roots." Garrett doesn't get that. That night, after Garrett rushed off claiming something urgent came up at work, Grandpa made me hot cocoa and we sat by the fireplace. His voice was low, but his words settled deep in my heart. "If you can hold on to this place, Solene, you'll hold on to our roots. Not everyone sees the value in a porch roof, or in the sound of wind whistling through wooden slats, or in the scent of pine on a winter morning. But you do. I know you do." From that point on, I drove back to the cabin every weekend, rain or snow without fail. Not out of obligation, but because it was the last living part of my mother, my childhood, and of memories that couldn't be replicated. I learned how to fix leaking shingles, how to light a wood stove in brutal winters, even how to prime a well pump when the old motor stalled. About 2 years ago, Grandpa began to decline. The afternoons on the porch stopped. He'd rest more in bed, eyes closed but fingers always brushing the spine of his favorite book. I'd sit beside him, reading aloud passages he once read to me as a child. On those nights, time slowed and it felt like the cabin held its breath with us. One spring night last year, he called me into his room. On the table lay an unsealed envelope and a wooden box the size of his palm. He placed his hand over mine, his gaze steady, more serious than I had ever seen. "Solene, some things can't be said out loud. When you truly need to know the truth, open this box. The safe's code at the cabin is your grandmother's birthday. Remember that." I nodded. I didn't ask any more questions. If Grandpa chose silence, it meant the truth would eventually speak for itself. Garrett never heard words like that. Maybe Grandpa knew he wouldn't care. Or maybe he tried and Garrett was just too busy to listen. But for me, that cabin wasn't real estate. It was where I first understood what unconditional love meant. The only place in the world I could be fully myself without proving I was worth it. And that's why, when Garrett stood in the middle of his housewarming party and boldly declared the cabin by the lake was his, I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't have proof, but because, in that moment, my heart shattered into pieces. Not from losing the cabin, but from watching memories I once thought sacred be paraded like decoration for someone's social status. I left the party quietly. It felt like someone had ripped out a part of me I had spent years protecting. Driving home, my hands trembled on the wheel and my mind spiraled with questions. How had Garrett gotten the cabin? Had Grandpa changed his mind? Or had someone pressured him in his final days? I didn't want to believe it. But Garrett's smug confidence, the strangely flawless signature on the letter, the way his eyes darted nervously before lifting his glass, it all felt wrong. I knew Grandpa's handwriting too well. Those shaky, drawn-out strokes shaped by years of arthritis. There was no way a man who struggled to hold a spoon could have signed such a clean, crisp signature. I arrived back at my small apartment in Minneapolis just before midnight. The city lights still glowed, but inside me was a quiet kind of chaos. I sat on the floor of my living room, opened the drawer beneath my bookshelf, the one where I kept things that truly mattered. There it was, a letter wrapped in brown tissue paper, Grandpa's familiar handwriting scrawled across the top. "Solene, open only when you need to know the truth." I slowly unfolded the note, hands shaking even though I had read that line dozens of times since he passed. Inside was a small sheet of paper, a short sentence in his usual no-frills style. "When you need to know the truth, open the safe at the cabin. The code is your grandmother's birthday." That was all. No explanation. No further instructions. But that single sentence made my chest tighten. My grandmother's birthday, October 8, 1944, was a sacred date for Grandpa. Even after she passed, he'd cook her favorite meatball stew, place their wedding photo on the table, and light a candle every year. I searched through the rest of the folder hoping for another clue, but that was it. Just that one line. The cabin, filled with history, with family, with words left unspoken. What struck me most was that the cabin hadn't been mentioned in the official will the lawyer read after the funeral. Not a single line. Not one word. As if it had never existed. But I knew real estate didn't just vanish from legal records. Plus, I jumped up, walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into the public county records system. Every property had an identification number, and I remembered the cabin was in Crow Wing County. After nearly 20 minutes of digging, I found it. My heart slowed as the screen loaded. The registered owner, Solene Thorne. Transfer date, December 8th of last year. Nearly 8 months before Grandpa passed. I sank to the floor, barely able to believe my eyes. My name had been on the deed all this time and I had no idea. So what was that letter? Garrett read aloud in front of the entire family. A staged performance? A blatant theft? I closed my eyes, heart tangled in a storm of questions. Maybe Grandpa had foreseen all of this. Maybe that was why he gave me the code to the safe. Not just to protect the property, but to protect the truth. I opened my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and stopped at a name. Evelyn Monroe, Grandpa's longtime friend and a retired bank officer. Evelyn always called me the town's honorary granddaughter and once told me, "Your grandfather was the most cautious man I've ever met. He never left anything important without a backup plan." I sent her a short message, no pleasantries, just one line. "I need to know if Grandpa ever came to the bank to transfer the cabin to me. It's really important." Less than 5 minutes later, she called. Her voice trembled with emotion. "Of course he did, Solene. I personally notarized the papers that day. His hands shook so badly, it took almost 30 minutes for him to sign 2 clean copies. Attorney Harold was present too. You didn't know. I choked back tears. He never said a word to me. Just left a letter and told me to protect the cabin like our roots. Well, you're doing exactly that. I hung up and looked at the clock. Almost 2 a.m. But I didn't feel tired anymore. A new wave of energy surged through my chest. The truth was close, waiting for me inside that steel box at the cabin. A house Grandpa left me not just on paper but with every ounce of his trust. I walked into the bedroom, packed a small backpack with a flashlight, the folder of documents, and a certified copy of the deed. Before getting a few hours of sleep, I glanced at the photo of Grandpa beside my bed, his gentle smile just as I remembered, and whispered, "I'll find out what you wanted me to know. Whatever it is." I left Minneapolis at 7 a.m., just as the sun broke through the clouds. The drive to the Silver Pine cabin took over 3 hours, weaving through dense pine forests and gravel roads littered with loose stones. On the radio, the host talked about an early cold snap approaching. I barely listened, my mind fixated on the metal safe quietly waiting in that wooden house Grandpa once called the final fortress of memory. The cabin had been locked up for over a month since the funeral. No one had visited, no one even mentioned it. Garrett never cared. And I hadn't had the strength to step inside. Everything in that cabin remained exactly as it had been, like Grandpa had just walked out yesterday. As the car turned onto the narrow dirt path that led to the property, I held my breath. The trees on both sides still stood tall, though a few branches had broken off in the wind. The cabin appeared through the clearing, quiet, familiar. The wooden sign hanging on the porch still bore the hand-carved words Grandpa made years ago. "Here memories don't fade." I stepped out, grabbed my backpack and the faded leather keychain. The lock was stiff and took a few turns before clicking open. The door creaked as it swung, the old hinges groaning like a deep sigh in the silence. The air inside was damp with the scent of old wood, dry grass, and a faint hint of Grandpa's signature peppermint tobacco. Everything was untouched. The rocking chair by the window, the pine tea table with a burn mark from a spilled candle, the bookshelf lined with leather-bound classics. A thin layer of dust coated every surface, like time itself had paused since he left. I set my bag down and walked toward the back room, Grandpa's old study. It was there that the safe was built into the wall, hidden behind a landscape painting of autumn woods. I slid the canvas aside, revealing the faded dial. I took a deep breath. Grandma's birth date, October 8, 1944. One by one I turned the numbers. When the lock clicked, my heart skipped a beat. I opened the safe. Inside, everything was arranged with eerie precision. No cash, no jewelry. Just 3 items. A folder of documents, a sealed yellow envelope, and a silver USB stick labeled in red ink. Memories are not to be altered. I pulled out the folder first and laid it on the table. My hands trembled as I unfastened the clip. Inside was the notarized deed transferring ownership of the Silver Pine cabin from Grandpa to me. The red stamp was still vibrant, with both his and attorney Harold Thompson's signatures. The date matched what I had seen in the county records, December 8th. The next document froze me in place. A copy of a formal complaint about signature forgery. Filed by Grandpa himself, submitted to Thompson's law office in mid-January, just 2 weeks after the deed transfer. Its contents left me breathless. I, Matthew Thorne, confirmed that someone attempted to forge my signature on documents related to the Silver Pine cabin. I request this file be preserved to affirm my ownership intentions and safeguard my wishes upon my passing. No names were mentioned, but I didn't need them. Garrett. Could only be him. I opened the final envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. Grandpa's writing, shaky but deliberate, was just as I remembered. The letter was short, barely a page, but every word weighed heavy. Solene, if you're reading this, something must have gone out of control. Memories can't be changed, but truth can be twisted if no one protects the roots. This cabin is where you grew up, where you learned to rise after pain. You understand it in a way no one else ever could, not even Garrett. I don't blame him. He just never learned how to love something he couldn't sell. The USB contains a recording I made myself. Watch it when you feel it's time. But remember, once you know the full story, there's no turning back. I set the letter down, feeling a strange tightness in my chest. Grandpa had never spoken harshly about Garrett, but in these words, I could hear the quiet ache of disappointment. The final line felt like a warning that I was about to uncover something I might not be ready for. I picked up the USB. It was light, but my hand felt heavy. Memories are not to be altered. The phrase read like a vow. Or perhaps a last request. Outside, the sky had started to darken. I remained seated, alone in the cabin, surrounded by footprints of years that would never return. In front of me lay the truth slowly revealing itself, but also the door to something I had never dared confront. The next morning, I returned to the cabin with a clear resolve. No more doubt. No more hesitation. Every piece of evidence was now in my possession. The notarized deed, the forgery complaint, Grandpa's letter, and the unopened USB, all confirmed one thing. The cabin was mine and Grandpa had done everything he could to protect it. I called my attorney, Hamilton, a sharp, calm woman who had been a college friend of my mother's. I sent her all the documents, asked her to verify the legality of everything, and requested she accompany me to a family dinner scheduled that weekend at Mr. Henry's house, Grandma's second husband and Garrett's father. That dinner had been planned as a discussion on cabin renovations, according to Garrett's message in the family group chat. Sounded generous, but I knew better. Garrett wanted to publicly claim the cabin and make it official in front of the entire extended family. Hamilton and I arrived at Mr. Henry's suburban home in Duluth right on time. The house was glowing with lights, the scent of grilled meat and apple pie filling the porch air. As we walked in, all eyes turned toward me. Some greeted politely, others wore unreadable expressions. Garrett stood by the dinner table, a glass of red wine in hand, his shirt crisply ironed. When he saw me, he smiled sharp and cold. "Soline, didn't think you'd have time," he smirked. "I figured you'd still be poking around in that safe." I didn't respond. Hamilton introduced herself calmly. Garrett's smirk faded slightly at the words personal attorney. Dinner began with beef stew and garlic bread. It might have felt normal, if not for the stiffness in every movement and every glance across the table. After dessert, I set my teacup down and stood, voice calm but clear. "I have something to share. Regarding the Silver Pine cabin." Garrett chuckled, shaking his head. "Still at it, huh?" Without looking at him, I opened my bag and pulled out the notarized deed, the forgery complaint, and Grandpa's letter. One by one, I placed them on the dinner table, carefully, deliberately, like restoring order to something that had been bent beyond recognition. The cabin was legally transferred to me 8 months ago. It carries my grandfather's signature, is properly notarized, and has been on file with attorney Harold Thompson. In addition, I pulled out the document. He also filed a statement confirming someone had attempted to forge his signature. Garrett shot up from his chair, the legs scraping sharply against the floor. He wasn't of sound mind anymore. Everyone knew he was confused, barely able to write his name. You took advantage of him at his weakest and made him sign it. Gasps rippled across the room. I looked Garrett straight in the eyes. You say he was confused, yet he was clear-headed enough to file a forgery complaint just after signing the transfer? It was filed at the law office and officially recorded. Garrett stepped forward, pointing at me, voice sharp. You always wanted everything for yourself. He favored you over me, always did. You were always hanging around him, and then when he got frail, you made him sign things he couldn't even understand. My hands clenched. If you question the documents, go verify them through legal means. But don't slander him. He gave everything for both of us. A voice rose from the far end of the table, low and steady. I think it's time I speak. All heads turned. It was Aunt Julie, my grandfather's sister, who lived in the mountains and rarely joined family gatherings. I've been silent long enough. But tonight, in front of everyone, I need to share what I saw with my own eyes 4 months ago. The room went still. That day, I visited Matthew and brought him apple pie like always. When I arrived, I heard Garrett raising his voice in the study. He handed Matthew a stack of papers, insisting he sign them, saying they were just maintenance grant forms for the cabin. But I caught a glimpse. The header said, Property Transfer Agreement. Matthew clearly refused to sign. Garrett turned pale. You're making that up. I'm not, Julie said firmly. I told Harold the very next day because it didn't feel right. If you had nothing to hide, why keep that from the family? Garrett's father, Mr. Henry, finally spoke. He set down his wine glass, blue eyes now sharp with disappointment. Garrett, is what your aunt said true? Garrett glanced around. His lips pressed tight. The arrogance was gone. He avoided eye contact, fists clenched. I just didn't want the cabin to go to waste. I thought I could renovate it, make it a family lodge. He would have wanted that. But the cabin wasn't just a house, I interrupted. It was memory. It was what he wanted preserved in his way. And he chose me because I understood that. No one said another word. There was no need. The heavy silence said everything. Garrett returned to his seat without a word. Dinner shattered, both literally and figuratively. But I knew the battle wasn't over. This was just the beginning. And I still had one video, unopened. That night, I returned to the cabin alone, carrying all the documents and the silver USB he'd left. The sky was thick with gray clouds. A cold wind rustled across the porch roof as if the cabin itself was listening. I lit a small lamp on the writing desk, drew the curtains, and placed my laptop on the old wooden surface where he used to read the paper and sip his morning coffee. The small silver USB sat in my palm, light as air, yet it weighed more than words. I plugged it in. The connection tone echoed through the quiet. One file appeared, its name in all caps. "N01 is to alter memory." I double-clicked. The video began. The frame was slightly misty like morning fog. Dim light from a lamp gave the space around him a warm but somber glow. He wore a faded pale blue sweater, sitting in the familiar rocking chair. The bookshelf I helped organize last winter stood behind him. His voice came through slow, lightly trembling from age, but every word was clear. "Solene, if you're watching this, then things didn't go the way I hoped. And I'm sorry. I always wished goodwill would win over greed. But if not, I want you to know the truth." I swallowed hard, my hand hovering near the keyboard. 2 months ago, he continued, Garrett came to the cabin unannounced. Said he wanted to fix the place up into a vacation lodge for the family. I was glad at first. But then, I caught him going through my files late at night. Thought I was asleep. He pulled out an unsigned old transfer draft and took photos of every page. The camera shook slightly as he raised his hand to touch a faded burn scar on his left hand. I remembered that scar from a long-ago accident with a hot water kettle. A small detail, but enough to remind me this was no fabrication. Days later, he said, voice heavy, I found a notebook he forgot in a drawer. Inside were copies of my signature. Practiced. Repeated. At least 50 attempts. Some were near perfect. Too perfect. My hands tensed. I didn't confront him. I feared breaking what little bond remained between my grandchildren. But I knew if I didn't act, this cabin would be turned into merchandise. A transaction. Not memory. He paused, wiping his eyes. Solene, my daughter, your mother, left this world too early. But you're still here. And you're the only one I trust to understand this place. Garrett, though my blood, isn't the kind who could protect its spirit. I sat frozen, chest tight with grief. I gave the cabin to you not because you're my only bloodline, but because you are the living memory of this place. You never treated it like a burden or an asset or an inheritance. The video ran nearly 10 minutes. He spoke of Garrett's sweet words masking schemes, the late night calls pretending to check in, but really probing about documents. He spoke not with anger, just sadness. And disappointment. I know, he ended, eyes locking onto the camera. There will come a time when things get twisted. When someone tries to take this from you. But don't be afraid, Solene. Truth always wins. Even if slow. Even if painful. It still wins. The screen went black. I stayed motionless for a long time. Even as the insects outside began their nightly chorus, I didn't move. I don't know when the tears started, only that they were there, soaking into my sleeves, cold and salty. I wasn't just holding undeniable proof of Garrett's lies. I was holding the painful truth that my grandfather spent his last months doubting his own kin. Preparing, silently, for a battle I didn't yet know I'd have to fight. I whispered into the quiet as if he were sitting nearby in that old rocking chair by the fireplace. You did everything to protect this place. Now it's my turn. Then I pulled out the USB, placed it back in its wooden box, locked it gently, and set it on the bookshelf like a silent declaration. Not just to keep the cabin but to honor what he trusted in me. And everything he had fought to preserve, with all that remained of his life. I wasn't surprised when Garrett served me with a lawsuit the following weekend. He accused me of unlawful seizure of property and forgery of legal documents. Even though I had braced for it, holding that thick court envelope delivered to my door still made my chest drop. Mrs. Hamilton, my attorney, read through every line of the lawsuit and let out a sigh. He's playing his last card, Solene. A scare tactic, hoping you'll lose your nerve or back out. I shook my head. I'm not stepping back. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. On the morning of the hearing, I arrived early with Mrs. Hamilton. Garrett walked into the courtroom in an expensive suit, chin high, carrying a leather briefcase like a successful businessman. But his eyes darted around constantly. He never looked at me once. The judge, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a face that gave nothing away, sat upright at the bench, listening to both sides present. Garrett began with a long drawn-out statement, insisting that the cabin was part of an unresolved estate and that I had manipulated our grandfather into signing papers when he was no longer of sound mind. He painted me as an opportunist, preying on an old man's weakness to seize property. I sat quietly, keeping a calm expression. I didn't need to react emotionally. The truth would speak for itself. When it was Mrs. Hamilton's turn, she laid out each piece of evidence with clarity. The original notarized document, the copy from the county registry, the complaint about forged signatures, and the video my grandfather had recorded. Each item was projected onto the courtroom's large display, impossible to dispute. Garrett began to lose patience. When the judge asked about the video, he snapped, "That could have been doctored. Technology can fake anything these days." Mrs. Hamilton responded gently, "We submitted the video to 2 independent forensic analysts. Both confirmed there was no sign of tampering. The reports were filed with the court this morning." Garrett's side began to scramble. His lawyer requested a recess to prepare a rebuttal, but the judge denied it, ordering the trial to proceed as scheduled. At that moment, Mrs. Hamilton gave a subtle signal to someone entering through the back door. I turned and almost didn't recognize her. Teresa. She wore a light blue blouse, her hair neatly tied back, eyes quiet but firm. She had dated Garrett for 2 years before breaking up just months before my grandfather passed. When she took the witness stand, she looked straight at the judge, her voice steady even though her hands were clenched. "I'm testifying as someone who lived with Garrett and witnessed behavior related to this case." "Specifically?" the judge asked. Teresa took a deep breath. "Garrett used to spend nights practicing our grandfather's signature on blank paper. He'd sit in his office and once even asked me to judge how close the signature looked." Garrett jumped up. "You're making this up." The judge banged her gavel, ordering silence. Teresa continued. "That's not all. Once, Garrett asked me to pretend to be a bank employee on a video call to verify a transaction. I refused and he got furious. He said he'd break up with me if I didn't help." I looked at Mrs. Hamilton. She nodded slightly, then pulled out another USB drive and plugged it into the courtroom's presentation system. "Your Honor, we submit an audio recording provided by witness Teresa. The conversation was legally recorded inside the shared apartment." Garrett shouted, "That's private. She had no right." The judge's voice cut sharp. "Mr. Garrett, stay silent or I'll have you removed from the courtroom." The audio played. Teresa and Garrett's voices were crystal clear. "If you get the cabin, everything will be settled. Sell it, pay the debts. Mom won't threaten with a lawyer anymore and you won't have to dump stocks below value." "You said the cabin was sentimental?" Teresa asked. "It's an asset. Stop romanticizing it." The courtroom fell silent. Garrett stood frozen, pale as a sheet. The judge sat straighter, resting her hand lightly on the gavel. "Mr. Garrett, do you have a response to this recording?" Garrett opened his mouth but said nothing. His lawyer sat silently, eyes cast down. I didn't feel joy or vindication. Just a small release, like a weight had been lifted from my chest. The truth, no matter how often it's twisted, always finds its way back. Mrs. Hamilton leaned toward me and whispered, "The game's almost over, Solene." I didn't reply. My eyes were fixed on one spot, the place where my grandfather used to sit, where his old notebook once rested with that faded line blurred by tears and time. Though he was no longer here, I knew he was watching. And maybe he was nodding. 2 weeks after the hearing, I received the court's official ruling. Silver Pine Cabin was legally mine. Undisputed, unconditional. Garrett had lost, both in court and in the eyes of the public. News of the case spread faster than I expected. The local paper ran a short but detailed headline: Granddaughter rightfully inherits cabin after cousin exposed for fraud and attempted property theft. Garrett vanished from social media after the verdict. Those who once clapped him on the back at family parties and called him a young business prodigy now stayed silent. Friends stopped inviting him to events. Business partners quietly pulled away, and even his father, Mr. Henry, stopped responding to reporters. I wasn't happy to see Garrett fall like that. But I wasn't sad either. The truth had come out, and everyone had to face the consequences of their choices. One early winter morning, just after I cleared the cabin's roof in preparation for the first snowfall, I found an envelope in the mailbox. There was no return address. Heavy cream paper, handwritten script soft and elegant. I opened it. It was a letter from Mrs. Ellen, Teresa's mother. Dear Soline, I'm Ellen Monroe, Teresa's mother. You don't know me, but I've known of you for a while through Mr. Matthew's stories. I'm a retired nurse who helped care for him during his final months at home. One evening, he sat on the wooden chair by the porch, sunset glowing on his shoulders, and he looked out over the lake. Tears ran down his face and he didn't say a word. I didn't ask, I just quietly handed him a cup of hot tea. After a long pause, he whispered, I failed with Garrett. He looks at me and sees money, not a man. I write not to reopen wounds but to say this. He didn't fail. You're the proof. I saw his eyes when he spoke of you, eyes full of trust, love, and pride. Thank you for protecting what he left behind, not just a house but his heart. I placed the letter on the table, overcome by a feeling I couldn't describe. Some things don't need to be spoken aloud, but one line at the right time can break you in the gentlest way. That afternoon, I walked the woods behind the cabin, the same path my grandfather and I used to take every Sunday morning. My coat wasn't thick enough to keep out the chill, but the memories warmed me more than anything else could. As I rounded the bend near the old pine tree where he used to tie the hammock, I froze. In the clearing where sunlight filtered through the trees in golden streaks, a deer stood still. It didn't run when it saw me. Its deep black eyes held mine as if weighing something. Or maybe saying hello. We stood there silent. I didn't breathe too loud, didn't move. Just listened to the steady rhythm of my heart. Then the deer slowly bowed its head and disappeared into the brush, like it had never been there. I stood for a long moment, not because of the deer but because I felt guided. As if my grandfather was still here, not in form but in the trees, the wind, the spirit of this place. I returned to the cabin as the sun dipped behind the trees. The scent of burning wood filled the room, mingling with mint tea and the musty pages of the old book I'd left open on the table. I sat down, turning the pages of my grandfather's letters, each shaky line now etched into my memory. Above the fireplace, the black and white photo of my grandparents on their wedding day still sat quietly in its worn wooden frame. I got up, straightened the frame gently, then whispered, Garrett may have been wrong, but I'll honor what you wanted. Everything here, me, this cabin, our memories, will never be bought or twisted. And if one day Garrett finds the courage to return with a true heart, I won't close the door on him. In the soft, fading light of late afternoon, the cabin stood firm, just as it had for all those years, silent, holding on to things no one had yet named. And I knew then that what he left behind wasn't just wood and stone. It lived in how I chose to carry on with the same kindness he once gave me. After long weeks of court battles and quiet evenings beside the hearth, I made my way back to the attic, what Grandpa used to call the treasure vault of our family's memories. That old, dusty loft held the things he'd carefully tucked away over time, a time capsule of his life. I gently opened the weathered wooden box he had handed me just before he passed. The scent of aged wood had faded, but it still carried the sweetness of the years he poured into this place. Inside, along with the USB and legal papers, was a small dark brown leather notebook. I opened it, the yellowed pages glowing faintly under the dim light. Each shaky handwritten line carried so much strength and sincerity, I had to sit down and breathe slowly to take in every word. He wrote of his love for the family, of quiet moments with me, and even about Garrett, though their relationship had never been easy. The final line of the journal stopped me cold. Don't let Garrett lose his way. No matter what, he's still blood. I set the journal down, my heart torn in tiny pieces. Inside me, something cracked open. A whirlwind of anger at what Garrett had done, and something else. Compassion. Garrett hadn't just tried to steal the cabin. He was my cousin, the son of Henry, the same man who had barely shown him love or warmth. I remembered what I'd heard from old neighbors, from Teresa's mother, even from Mrs. Julie, the stories of a boy left behind in a power-hungry home, a child who never learned what love looked like and who grew into a man shaped by wounds. That was when I saw the painful truth. Garrett wasn't just my opponent in a legal fight. He was a symptom of a deeper hurt, a branch of the same family tree with roots in neglect. Could I forgive him? Could I look past the betrayal and see the boy who had never been taught how to care? He's still family, I whispered, a promise to myself and to Grandpa. The wooden box still lay open beside me, a quiet symbol of the responsibility I now carried, not just to protect this old home, but to protect what was left of our family bond, no matter how broken. I closed my eyes and remembered the way Grandpa looked at me that last evening, how he had asked me to guard the cabin like I would the roots of our family. Not just the house and heirlooms, but the spirit, the connection between people even when we hurt one another. In that silence I understood. This wasn't just about a home. It was about learning to love and forgive one another, even when the road there was anything but easy. I opened the notebook again, flipping each page with a new kind of determination. This was Grandpa's spiritual legacy, and I would carry it forward with all my heart. After all the fighting, all the aching days, I placed an anonymous letter into an envelope along with the spare cabin key. The letter was short but held everything I needed Garrett to know. If one day you want to live as your true self, come here. Not to take the cabin, but to find yourself again. I didn't know if Garrett would ever read it or even receive it. But sending it without pressure or expectation, that was how I opened a door. A door for forgiveness and for hope. The next day I returned to the cabin. Outside, Silver Pine Lake was still as glass, its surface reflecting the turquoise sky of early fall. Red and gold maple leaves covered the ground, rustling softly in the breeze. I settled into the old rocking chair Grandpa once used, a steaming mug of tea warming my hands. The scent of mint tea blended with fresh pine, softening something inside me. In the distance, I heard the gentle chime of wind bells, the same ones Grandpa had hung on the porch. Whenever the wind blew, that sound returned like a quiet reminder that he was still here, woven into every corner of this home. The evening sun cast golden reflections on the lake, its light twinkling like tiny stars. I smiled faintly, more at peace than I had been in years. Despite all the wounds, despite what hadn't healed yet, I believed love could still mend us, if we allowed it to. Then I heard it, the crunch of dry leaves from the path that led into the woods. I turned toward the sound and saw a figure walking slowly toward the cabin. That silhouette, familiar yet uncertain, made my heart beat faster. I stood, a strange mixture of anticipation and calm flooding me. As the figure emerged into the golden light, each step careful, it was like watching someone trace their way back through a forgotten memory. No one spoke at first. Only the wind stirred, the leaves whispering, the wind chime humming, like the quiet voice of a family not yet lost. I understood then our story wasn't over. There would be more trials, more questions, more healing. But today the door was open. And perhaps this was the beginning of something new. My story isn't just about a house or court rulings. It's about the journey back to truth, to family, and to one's own heart in the midst of hurt and misunderstanding. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced family conflict that left your heart heavy? Would you choose forgiveness or would you hold on to the pain? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Every story, every reflection helps us all understand a little more about the messy, beautiful nature of family, imperfect but always worth cherishing. And if you want to hear more real, heartfelt stories about family life, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. The next stories will offer deeper perspectives, powerful life lessons, and a true connection to what we all carry in our everyday lives. Thank you for walking this path with me. I'll see you again in the next story.